Okay, well, welcome to the Danger Dungeon Encounter podcast. I am your host, the Lanky Paladin, Dungeon Master Chase, and I am joined today with one of my good friends who I've run games with and had the pleasure to run in his games, Stephen Rubino. Rubino, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on your YouTube channel.
Not only do we have you on the YouTube channel, but you are our first guest. You're my go-to, man. You're my you're it. You're like the guy.
I'm glad to be, the guy for something. That's like it's a good feeling.
It is a good feeling. Well, it's good to have you, and it's been a pleasure to have you in games and as part of the Fort Worth Dungeons and Dragons community, because especially there on like the Fort Worth Facebook for Dungeons and Dragons, you're like the first guy who's always jumping in, telling people where to go and where to find games and stuff like that.
Yeah, I just have too much free time, I guess.
Is that what it is?
It's like a combination of free time and passion.
Yeah.
And then it just comes together into a perfect storm of timely responses.
Exactly. Just like the right person in the right place at the right time. All those coming together.
And just like my weird, my brain is like, in those crime shows where the guy has the corkboard with all the strings and like the pictures and stuff.
That's that like my brain. Sci-Fi Factory in Keller has a Thursday game, and I just know that you need to go there because you're going to enjoy it.
Yeah, that's like my brain for D&D and finding people games and stores to play at.
Yeah, well, someone needs to do that, so I'm glad that you're there and doing it. How long have you been into D&D?
I've been into D&D, since I was like 13, I think. I was hanging out. I can't even remember where I was. I was at some party I didn't want to be at, and like my brother was talking to some kids, and they seemed weird, and I like weird people, so we all started talking, and they're like, we're gonna go, we're gonna blow this off. We're gonna go play D&D at my friend Sean was like, we're gonna go play D&D at my house. So I was like, oh yeah, I've never played D&D. Can I play? And that was the beginning of it.
Get in the car. We're going to go roll some dice. And I know you've said THAC0 before. You know what that word means. So is that the edition that you got into D&D on? Was that a second edition or basic, or what was this?
I believe I got in. See, like now I get confused now because there's so many editions. And I believe I got in on second edition, but I also thought second edition was AD&D.
Yeah, there was Advanced Dungeons and Dragons second edition, so yeah, there was that too. What was the dude on the cover? Do you remember?
It's the guy with the wings on the horse,
Oh yeah.
The second edition player's handbook. I believe the DM's guide had like this wizard guy with fire in his hand or something. I can't 100% remember, but I need to. I've been wanting to track down some of those books.
Yeah, get in there. How long did you get like right into 5th edition when that dropped, or did you kind of wait a little bit to get into that?
I was actually kind of shunning D&D at the time 5th edition dropped. I didn't know about it until much later. I was still playing 3rd edition because I was like, I was salty about 4th edition. And like now I kind of want to go back and play with 4th edition just for historical purposes, like get an idea of what that dark period of D&D was. Just so I can kind of, I'm kind of a completionist, I guess.
Yeah, like I've kind of had that like desire to go back and just maybe explore 4th edition just to kind of like see what the mechanics and where it came from. Because I only played like a couple games in 4th edition when that was out. But especially the fact that they have Dark Sun available for 4th edition, which, I know how you're a big Dark Sun fan too, aren't you?
Oh, yeah, and they had a ton of Dark Sun stuff and a ton of Eberron stuff. That's kind of what makes me think maybe I need to check it out.
Yeah. So what was the first book that you got into for 5th edition then? When did you jump on?
I was, so for 5th edition, I got into 5th edition with my friend, same friend who got me into D&D period. He was like, hey man, you got to check out 5th edition. Cause I was still like, I'm not messing around with anything after 3rd. He's like, you got to check out 5th edition. It kind of reminds me of 2nd. So I was like, okay, you've got my curiosity.
Yeah. Was that like Curse of Strahd days or like before that, Elemental Evils?
They might have had like Horde of the Dragon Queen. I don't remember. Like, I think at the time, maybe Princes of the Apocalypse was like, they were teasing it.
Yeah. Like
it hadn't come out yet. This was maybe, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago.
Probably,
was it that long?
That sounds about like 2015 in time. So they're still pretty early in that. So what other games besides Dungeons and Dragons do you like to play? What other tabletop RPGs?
It's pretty Dungeons and Dragons adjacent, but I love Starfinder. I'd like to either play or run more of that, but that's pretty like very D&D. Index card RPG I do love. It's kind of like a looser framework, very D20 oriented. It's like a very rules light D&D. And it has different settings like space, Wild West, and high fantasy. I think they just came out with a superheroes expansion, and they have probably like, I'm guessing that if they don't have one, they will soon, like a pulp detective setting or cyberpunk or whatever.
Yeah, I just saw they
Um,
did like a random setting for an aliens xenomorph style game. I kind of want to check that out. That seems pretty awesome, especially because I love the Aliens movie franchise.
oh yeah, survival horror in space. Why not? Sign me up.
Yeah, I always kind of felt like index card RPG too is like a fantastic for one shots, and horror does so well for one shots.
I know you love. I know you love Shadowrun. I love Shadowrun. I started playing Cyberpunk almost as early as I started playing D&D, because like the same group of friends occasionally played Cyberpunk games, so I was into that for a while. All D10 system, really weird. Uh, the Cyberpunk 2020, which is like, that was the future back then.
In
It's
2020.
2020.
Yeah.
Like as far forward as we could possibly think. You're gonna have full body replacements. You're gonna have people paying money to get cybernetics to make them look like goblins and lizards and shit stuff. Uh,
Yeah, get it together. Get it together, the
yeah, I
future.
know.
You're
I
not
mean,
you're not being nearly enough
yeah,
cyberpunk
like
for me.
why can't I spend my entire year's salary to look like an ogre right now? Future.
I feel like you could. It just
I
wouldn't be
probably could. I
as
mean, I'm close
accepted.
enough.
Yeah.
I just need to probably get some brow and like get my jaw to come out a little further. Um, but yeah, other games I used to love, like the storyteller system, White Wolf stuff, uh, just like the different kind of style of playing. They had a really cool one called Exalted, where you'd play as these demigods, and that was a cool one. You know, it's just like a different, a little bit more rules light, less crunch type system.
Uh, but yeah, I see. Like when you got into D&D, I remember you were playing at the collected location on the traffic circle, and then like you pretty quickly moved into being a community organizer too, with kind of that D&D scene and like trying to get people to run games and try to put games together, and kind of got involved into the AL scene too, didn't you?
Yeah, for a while. I mean, it was a good group, and it was like a pretty big boom. And you know, we had kind of our own little thing going in Fort Worth. Like there were some bigger things going on in Dallas, and some other groups kind of uniting and creating their own thing. But we were just kind of our own little bubble. And you know, it was kind of a cool little community. We all kind of, you know, like everybody that was organizing, you know, someone organized in this store, somebody organized in this store. I got started as mainly like the reason I became like a coordinator was I was coordinating like the local online stuff at first.
Yeah.
So like play by post, fantasy ground stuff. I was doing a lot of that, but also running games in store. But you know, all the stores were taken. You know, all the coordinators, all the stores already had a coordinator. There was like everybody and their dad was a coordinator at the time. So
I I just remember like collected, especially during that time, like walking in and seeing like 5 tables playing Dungeons and Dragons, which was such a crazy thing for me, being, you know, from a school where it's like you knew like 2 or 3 guys that played Dungeons and Dragons, and then you didn't even play it up at the shop. You played it at someone's house, kind of in the darkness, and then
yeah,
like
and they could never even play it at the same time. Like you knew 5 guys, and maybe you could get 2 of them together.
yeah, and then like seeing like 5 tables overflowing, and that night, like just like so many people, I was like, man, like Dungeons and Dragons has really come back hard. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean it's like a blessing and a curse, I think, because you got like, you know, you got like the new people who have like stars in their eyes and they really want to learn and they don't have any bad habits, and then you have the people who want to play Skyrim. So like it's kind of like sometimes you gotta break some people's habits and be like, hey man, you know, it's a team game. You can't just like wander off and pick all the guards' pockets. You gotta think about like the consequences that's gonna have for the other 6 people sitting at this table.
I run ahead and loot everything, especially
Yeah.
the dragon
There's
scale
always that
armor.
And if you run in store long enough, you're going to meet a lot of those people. But you're also going to meet a lot of like really good people who are going to be very excited to play. So that's kind of like, you know, doing that for a little while in the store at like meeting the new players, DMing Adventurers League, which to me is like, how I feel about Adventurers League. And maybe if I'm a guest on this show again, some of the rest of you will get to know. Yeah, and I think it's like a good tool for getting people into the hobby. That's my official stance on Adventurers League, especially since like I do a lot of organizing for Adventurers League, so I probably shouldn't talk too much crap.
No. We're all coming from a place of love, and we just want to see it
Yeah,
do the best it can be and get people into the hobby. And it's a great place to find new players and get them into doing stuff. But yeah,
and they're huge. Like the other great thing I should say about Adventurers League is they're really big on supporting like charity efforts. And
and
I love that. So like whenever we do a charity event, they're always very generous.
yeah, and speaking of that, you've done a couple epics. How did you? Now, what exactly was the con that you were doing? What was that called?
Oh, Nauticon. Yeah, we had a Nauticon going a couple years in a row. And like we had a couple of other people helping out, like coming in and out, doing different things, and kind of doing smaller conventions. Like I said, Fort Worth has always been kind of like a little bubble in the North Texas D&D community. So like my biggest thing about doing Nauticon was like, hey, we don't have conventions. I was looking around, and I saw like there were all these conventions doing epics, sometimes in the bigger stores, and I was like, well, we don't have huge stores like Madness or Common Grounds or whatever. So we just have to maybe split it up and do it across a couple of different stores. And so we started kind of doing these little guerrilla epics where we'd find like two or three stores that wanted to participate, and just like trying to. The hardest part was divvying up players, because like people all have their preferences. You need certain people to be at certain tables to make a tier 3 and a tier 4 table or whatever. So like the biggest problem there was like logistics, but people liked them. They still ask about them. Maybe I'll do one again someday.
Yeah, and your thing with Nauticon too was like you kind of wanted to do an epic for people who not necessarily like to go to cons. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, because like for me, like I've got PTSD and hypervigilance and all that stuff. So I hate going into big conventions. I do it sometimes because I love the hobby, and I'll just go straight to the D&D area and either play or DM and shut out the world. But like some people, they really really can't do that. And like I figured epics are exclusive content, and you're not going to get them just playing at like in someone's basement or in the comic book shop. So like trying to bring that con exclusive content into the places where people were playing was my kind of motivation.
Yeah.
Especially for the people that like had anxiety issues or whatever and couldn't go into those big crowds.
Yeah. So exactly. So if you played like normal Adventure League and stuff like that, what's different between a normal Adventure League game and an epic game?
The big difference is kind of interplay between tables. So like you'll have 5 to 12 to 20 tables, and everything that not only every player at the table does affects everyone sitting there, but it affects the table next to them. And like you have to make certain objectives, and making objectives helps everyone out and stuff like that. You can, in some epics, you can throw boons to other tables, or banes. You can like actually hinder another table's progress. So there's a lot of kind of like competitiveness and to a certain extent cooperation too, and just kind of like this atmosphere where everyone's kind of cheering. Something big happens and the whole room starts cheering, and then like the information slowly filters to you sitting at the table across the room what happened over there. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like a cool thing like that, where you kind of it generates a lot of a different kind of excitement than like a 5-person tabletop game.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome to see like 40 people cheering because the big boss has finally been taken down by some random person. That's a good feeling.
Yeah.
I've definitely been in games where like I've seen that happen. Can anyone run an epic, or is that like what's the process for doing one of those?
The process kind of evolved a little bit. Like at first I was like, there's no way they're going to let me run an epic. They were like, give us a website, give us a date, tell us what your thing is. And like the guy that was running them at the time, the community organizer Bill Benham, was was a very cool guy. He was like very supportive of the idea of doing a different kind of epic for people that had a hard time with, big crowds and open spaces and all that. So like, he was very behind it, and like, sent us a lot of support to get it done. And it's just about asking. It's always free to ask. Was my approach to it. If they say no, they say no. Now it's a little bit more complicated. You have to have a code of conduct and all that stuff. You have to have some kind of website that you can point to, and a date and a location and all that, like the old stuff that you used to have.
Yeah, so you essentially just
Like
have to have an event and then reach out to Wizards or one of the Adventure League coordinators to let them know that you're interested, right?
Yeah, and usually you got to give them like at least a few months, and that's good too, because like you want to give yourself a few months to gather up DMs. You're gonna need like, because people are gonna cancel. You're gonna need like 10 DMs, and that's not always an easy feat in itself.
Yeah. And so
Which is where prize support comes in. Wizards of the Coast sent us books to give to our DMs.
And when you were doing your epic, you did a charity epic. So how exactly did you raise money for people in the epic? Like, what did you do that you were able to raise money?
Well, the owner of Collected, like basically didn't take a cut. Normally like when you do a D&D game, like some goes to the DM, some goes to the store. He just said, well, we'll put all the money that you bring in for admission, and we'll just put it straight into the charity. He donated also the proceeds from snacks and stuff people bought. We contacted dice companies and different kinds of miniature companies and all around to get donations that we could raffle off. So like basically we did all these, we kind of gathered up, went around hat in hand begging for like some stuff that we could give away to kind of bring people in so they could pay $5 to play the epic, and all that $5 would go to charity. And then we do these raffles and or silent auctions or whatever, depending on what kind of item we were raffling off. And just put all that money into a pot and then brought it over to the charity. We've done them for food banks, we've done them for animal shelters, and most recently the one that I was involved in was for a domestic abuse shelter.
Fantastic. And who was awesome enough to donate you some supplies for those games? Do you remember?
Yeah, we like the biggest donors: Wizards of the Coast, Kraken Dice, Skull Splitter Dice, Die Hard Dice. Those are all a bunch of great companies. We got a lot of dice that we auctioned off or raffled off. Sometimes we'd give them as like DM grab bags too, to kind of entice more DMs to come in. The other Wizards of the Coast donated some books, and we raffled off some of those. We gave the rest to the DMs that showed up to the event. And the local stores and artisans donated a bunch of stuff. So like a couple of the stores donated some books for us to auction off. We had a guy that does Thanecrafted pickles come and like auction off, or selling jars of pickles, and like for every jar of pickles he sold, he dropped like $20 in the collections basket.
That's awesome. And you also allowed players to do re-rolls for $1. Is that correct?
Yeah, we were. I was hesitant to do it because sometimes that causes some problems, but people really wanted it, so like we allowed the re-rolls, and like like you buy them in advance, you can spend them to re-roll any die to kind of keep your characters alive, especially in the tougher epics. That comes in pretty handy.
Yeah, and it also raises a lot of money for some good causes. It's been awesome seeing people raise money for that stuff, especially going through a hobby that you love, like Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, and I was surprised how many faces I'd never seen before that we brought into that last one. Met some people that kind of have been coming into other events now since they came in through that charity epic.
Yeah. You are listening to the Danger Dungeon Encounter podcast with my guest, Stephen Rubino. How many games a week are you running?
Right now, just one. Occasionally I'll run something extra like once or twice a month, but my weekly game is just one now.
Just once a day a week, and that's all you play? You don't play in anyone else's game? on
Usually I have something going on at least a second time a week. Like uh now that Fort Worth game night site is going, and like we jumped in on that woman Beth's game. So like I have that every other week, and then on the off weeks there's something. This week we have gals and pals night, so I'll probably be wrangling any stray dudes that show up and running some D&D for them.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah. And you're doing like currently like a homebrew game set in the Wild West?
Yeah, it's kind of weird. It's like all the things I wanted to run smashed into one game and trying to connect it in a way that's coherent.
Can you kind of explain kind of some of the key points that you're trying to do and bring into your game?
Yeah, I wanted to make it kind of big, I wanted to make the world big, but I wanted to make the story a little bit smaller and more episodic. I wanted to kind of tie in some elements of like the kind of the classic JRPGs like Final Fantasy, and one of the ones, the weird one that I kind of drew some inspiration from was Azure Dreams, where like you went into this dungeon that would every time you went in, it was a little bit different, and kind of one of the I guess maybe earlier kind of roguelike repeating dungeon games. So I wanted to mix in a little bit of that. I wanted to mix in a little bit of superhero stuff. So I kind of like started saying, well, how do I make this work? And like, what do I have to cut out? What do I have to pare down? And I ended up with kind of this weird West game where there's this tower in the center, kind of not necessarily the center of the world because it's in the middle of nowhere, but kind of viewed as in the center of the world because you can see it from everywhere. No matter where you are, you can kind of still see this spire. And it was ignored for a very long time. Sometimes people would go in, but they'd never come back. And then like the first couple people started coming back from exploring it, and they'd found kind of a little bit of power and incrementally kind of explored a little bit more. And it became kind of like a gold rush type situation.
And
And I figured,
that's what's drawing adventurers to, is this kind of tower of adventure.
yes.
Yeah.
And there were some a lot of valuables in there, like whether it was material wealth or magical artifacts, stuff like that. I kind of wanted to make it this thing that people would kind of start to do anything to get control over. And then there's this other, and I was like, well, what's to stop these interests from the more civilized parts of the world from just coming in and taking over and like just restricting access to the tower to themselves. I was like, well, I want to have these kind of adventurers that had gone so far in the tower that they had ascended beyond kind of human abilities. So they're kind of referred to as demigods. They're still more or less mortal, but just very kind of, like in the sense that you think a high level adventurer is almost godlike in a lot of ways. They're kind of like that, but they have a lot of them have a few kind of extra qualities about them that give them a little bit of flavor.
Nice. And so you're kind of creating a system here outside of the normal fantasy system that Dungeons and Dragons provides people. Like, what resources are you using to create your Wild West game, where I assume that there would be stuff like guns and trains and all kinds of other strange things, especially with a Japanese JRPG influence?
One of my main sources is Grease Monkey's Guide to it's like the main purpose of the book is like bringing fantasy mechs into D&D, but it has firearms and like different kinds of futuristic weapons. I'm using kind of the guild structure from Ravnica to kind of the Ravnica D&D setting to kind of create a structure for these large organizations that kind of that war for control over this tower. And for the tech stuff, it's mostly the Grease Monkey's Guide. I found that the DM's Guide firearms were a little bit overpowered and kind of washed out a lot of the non-firearm weapons. And I wanted to kind of have a weird balance or tension between kind of the old and the new in my world. So like you might still see someone in magical plate mail with like a flaming sword, but you might also see someone kind of in a duster with a rifle, and either one would be, equally as effective because I want to give players license to kind of write their own stories.
And so when you're writing like a story like this from just a brand new world where there's really nothing going on, do you borrow from other books and other adventures, or do you make stuff up, or is that kind of like a 50-50 process for you? Like, what's your process for a story?
I borrow a lot, and like sometimes I don't even, like sometimes you don't even know you're borrowing. Like it's like you think of something and you're like, oh, this is, you look back on it later and you're like, oh, this was heavily influenced by this thing that I read or this movie I saw or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I'm definitely borrowing from books, borrowing from video games.
But not directly
Um,
from like modules, like saying taking parts of Lost Mines of Fandelver and just plugging that in a Wild West style setting.
I've done it once or twice actually, especially like if I get behind on my planning and I don't have something specifically to do that will like create that combat pillar. I'll throw in like some encounters from something else. I mean, it's easy enough to kind of string together some encounters, but it's good to have like sometimes, especially my players seem to like exploring a map, for example. And if I'm like coming to crunch time and I need to throw something together, I'll either just uh, find a map and throw a grid down on it in my computer and put it in Fantasy Grounds and then just start plugging in encounters. Or if I'm being really lazy, I'll be like, I'm gonna do Lost Mines and like switch out some monsters, kind of move some things around.
Yeah.
Uh,
And you have kind of an interesting setup. Now you still play at a hobby shop. I think you play at Collected Altamir. Big shout out to them because that's where I run my games too. So we love our Collected family. But you drag your giant TV up there to run maps on and stuff like that. What's that process like?
it's kind of sometimes it's a pain dragging that TV, but it's like I have this specific style of laziness where sometimes I'll go through more effort to be lazy than like that than it would take me to actually just draw a map. I'll be like, no, I'm gonna drag my TV out there so I don't have to draw. One of the big benefits I see from doing it that way is the fog of war. That's a little bit harder to do when you're drawing out a map. I mean, you can draw the map out one square at a time or whatever, but like with Fantasy Grounds, I can slowly reveal the room. Like if they're in a dark room with torches, I can decide that I'm only going to reveal like 20 feet past where the party's standing.
Yeah. And so what's your setup like? You're dragging your computer out and you're just running Fantasy Grounds the entire time on your computer?
Yeah, I almost never use Fantasy Grounds online anymore. It's mostly just to project maps onto a TV in a game store, um, to kind of get that map out there, and like I'll just run it as like a local host, like run a second instance of Fantasy Grounds as my map screen, and one as my DM control screen.
Yeah, and then you just let your players bring their minis and just put it right on top of your TV.
My TV is pretty messed up anyway, so I let them put those minis right on top of it.
Let them. Do you let people roll right on top of your TV?
Oh no! Don't spread that rumor. Everybody's listening to this YouTube channel. You are not allowed to roll your dice on top of my TV.
Yeah, that's a strange thing. You got to know someone before you can roll dice on their TV.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So there's another special thing that I've seen you do. Like I think all kind of dungeon masters, they always kind of have like their thing that they're trying to do, and more often than not, games that I've been in with you, and I know you're doing it in your Wild West games. Also, you're really big into giving players a special item that's kind of associated with their character and ties into their story somehow. What exactly is that?
So like it started with me. Like I just find like the items that were always more interesting to me were the weird ones. So like the instant fortress and the bands of Bilyaro and all that stuff, where it's just like it's not a plus X sword. It's like a thing that has a little bit more flavor to it. So I was like, I want to make items that it's not about like the mechanical advantage, or if it is about a mechanical advantage, it's tweaking their class ability in some weird way, or like doing something very tailored to the character rather than like creating this very static advantage. And I like the idea of, I remember this from third edition. There was a book about legacy weapons, and I've always been kind of fascinated with that idea of like, you know, oh, I have this, I have my father's sword, but I'm going to chuck it aside because I found this +3 sword in this adventure that's better than my father's sword. And like, I can keep my father's sword. I'm just going to keep it sheathed on my back so it doesn't get in the way when I'm trying to swing this +3 sword around. So like, I want an item that a character can be more nostalgic with, that will grow with the character as they grow, and it gives them some sort of benefit that's completely like they're not going to find anywhere else in the DM guide. So to me, it's about kind of creating these kind of items that will either be from the character's past or be part of the character's story going forward.
Yeah.
Or both.
Do you have any special items now in your Wild West game?
Yeah, now I'm trying to tweak like a system so that the items are going to grow with renown, which I have not perfected yet. We're still testing. But we have a couple of different items. I know there's one character, Billy, who's like a fisticuffs type player who has a bladed whip that I was a little weary about because, you know, the whole, I guess, what was it, Soul Calibur with the bladed whip and all that stuff. I was like, oh, I don't know. And then there was that really cheesy bladed whip in Brotherhood of the Wolf. And I was like, please, no bladed whips. But we're working on a system to kind of make it cool and cinematic. That's another inspiration actually for this world I'm doing is Eberron, which was very geared towards cinematic play. So like I'm kind of trying to create like this pulpy cinematic world in the spirit of Eberron.
Yeah, I mean it's great to have the Wild West too. I mean that's so many cool things you can throw into a game like that.
Yeah, and actually one of the other characters is like an old sheriff who is like an arcanist and an occultist, and he has this revolver that if he kills someone with it, there's like a percentage chance, like he'll gain some temporary hit points, and there's a percentage chance that the person that dies comes back as a zombie.
Nice. Is he playing a necromancer or anything like that ties into that?
Yeah, he ended up going with necromancer. Nice.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and being on our podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun to be on here and talk about D&D for a while.
Yeah, that's the whole point of this whole thing is I just want to talk about D&D all the time, so I might as well be doing something with it and sharing that D&D love as well.
Oh yeah.
I think like one of the funniest things I've ever seen you do in a game is when we were running an epic and there was this big boss monster that suddenly dropped down and he had this total Arnold Schwarzenegger kind of weird accent. Do you remember that character?
Oh damn. Were we playing in the epic?
No, you were. I think we were running the epic.
Oh yeah, I remember that guy now. He was like the giant.
Yeah,
he was the Baron something or other.
Can you still do that voice?
It was like, yes, come here. I want to just introduce myself to you and perhaps give you something from inside of this bag.
Nothing bad and horrible will happen to you at all. I think I was laughing about that.
I think he was calling people darling a lot too.
Yeah, I was laughing about that character for probably a week, and even to the point now where I'm like remembering it fondly. I just want every game I have to have some like.
I was like, I'm not gonna do this as like a gruff, like scary giant voice. I'm gonna be really weird about this.
It turned out great. Thank you so much for listening to the Danger Dungeon Encounter podcast. If you like content like this, keep an eye on this channel because we have more stuff coming at you. Until then, keep those dice rolling and let's keep on making this stuff up on the fly together.